Thanks for tuning into this one. So again, as per normal, just a run through of the headlines that have been about in the news for the last week or so. So one initial one that we picked out here was around Bitcoin's Giffen good or bubble. So I think a Giffen goods are defined as those goods whose demand rises as their price rises. So people ask me about Bitcoins a lot in terms of, do we feel that they're going to keep the value is going to keep growing? Are we going to get to this magical $25,000 per Bitcoin mark? The short answer is I don't know, and nobody knows. But I think what we have to do is understand where we're at in the market and the technology that's being used. So people like Bitcoins because they run on something called blockchain, which is decentralized. We know that people are miners all over the world. They give up their PCs to be able to mine the Bitcoins, which is pretty much being able to give CPU compensation, computational processing power to the blockchain because it's encrypted to get around all of the ciphering. So obviously, it's a piece of technology that's decentralized, but people like that because it means that you can transfer effectively from peer to peer without having to go through the banking system, which again has some issues from people using it illegally, but that's potentially a conversation for another day. So when people ask me about Bitcoins, I say this: we are effectively in a situation where we need decentralized applications and blockchain anyway. People don't have as much faith in the bank, so want something that is effectively peer to peer, that isn't managed and dominated by banks and countries and all of this good stuff. But in what we have to understand is that currently the value is perceived value with Bitcoin, and it is sort of being hyped. But the reason what we want cryptocurrencies for and the underlying big blockchain is very much will add value to the human race. The problem with that is that lots of different forks of cryptocurrencies are coming out. The general requirement for cryptocurrencies will reach a certain limit, and that limit can be justified and facilitated via some of the more established still worked on cryptocurrencies like Ethereum and Ripple, and people that are trying to then bind this into banking systems. And within Azure, you can get instances that help you interact with Ethereum. The problem with Bitcoin is that there's a lot of secrecy. The guy that originally created it, the cipher, one of the cypherpunks, Satoshi Nakamoto, I think his name is, if memory serves me correctly, he doesn't exist anymore. So therefore, we worry about general updates and what updates can happen to that to the blockchain and to Bitcoin. So I think Bitcoin will go up and will burst at some point, and I think it will make quite a few people rich, and unfortunately some people poor. But cryptocurrencies are here to stay, and we are likely to see a market of more established, well-established cryptocurrencies that can still have development and can still have work done on them. And I think what they will then start doing is be regulated and start binding into the rest of the banking system, and what we will get is the ability for payments to be facilitated a lot cheaper and a lot more effectively, and taking some power away from the bank. So I think it will burst at some point, but we'll come back down to a level which is then more functional use for the human race, as opposed to something that is just effectively hype, or is perceived as hype at this stage. So the next story that I've got here is around DevOps. So DevOps will be a big feature in general on this review, and I think the reason why I like this article in particular is that this guy is kind of explaining that we keep using DevOps as a bit of a buzzword, almost like cloud was originally. When the idiom for cloud first come out, it was effectively servers in the data center, but we called it cloud. So DevOps is a bit of a buzzword that gets bandied around quite a lot. I've worked in banks sort of 15 years, so we've been using DevOps processes, continuous integration, unit tests of code that are written before we actually write the line of code, so that when we check in or modify a line of code, all of the 50,000 integration tests and unit tests will all be kicked off and tell you if you've broken something. That really helps with regression. The ability to Phoenix environments using virtualization software, so we can keep continuously testing. Those sort of practices and principles have been around for some time, but I think we're turning things into more of a Silicon Valley approach, and we're being able to give things like Amazon and Azure, we're being able to to give a bit more of a DevOps culture to the likes of more of the mainstream masses, as it were. And one thing we have to understand about DevOps is that it is a culture and a discipline that allows you to move and through software development a lot more effectively. And what this is and however you look at this, and part of the problem is because it's fundamentally uses a lot of open source tools, which people can be quite scared of. But it's basically saying if we're constantly testing and constantly delivering software, and we're not just piling up lots of code that no one ever knows about, regression is a massive issue in terms of software development. If we've got a 15-year-old application that developers have come and gone and people don't know what's in that code, if we haven't got a solid test plan, how do we know if we change this code, then that's going to have a disastrous effect when we roll it out to the community or internally within a business. So what DevOps, and I think the reason why I like this article, it's just really kind of saying, well, do you know what? It's just a lot of common sense, and you can bring DevOps culture to a business without having all continuous integration frameworks and all open source technology and be completely in Amazon or Azure or things like this. It's about the mindset of how you approach the ability to give your business continuous delivery. I think we will go into more detail in other videos, but DevOps is just, to me, one of them cloud type of buzzwords when it come out in the beginning. What this really does is we're asking businesses and software development teams and managers and the funders of software development teams to turn their ideologies around a little bit which is more in line to create efficiency as opposed to what we call an old waterfall style methodology. So DevOps is agile, but getting to an agile place is to me, it doesn't mean to say that we have to have all of these latest flashy tools. It is a culture and it is an understanding, and quite a lot of rigid businesses struggle with this, and that's why DevOps for some people seems to be quite hard. So the next item here, just really pick this out, an item around Salesforce now goes live on AWS. So we know that Salesforce has a fantastic infrastructure and they're good at their own data center technology. We know that it runs on force.com, which effectively allows everyone to integrate with Salesforce. New and exciting tool sets are coming out for Salesforce all the time. But it's interesting that we see in the Australian Business Review here that I would imagine that Salesforce doesn't have a data center in Australia. So they've said, well, what is the best technology we can run this on? AWS is absolutely fine for this job. So it's interesting, quite a bold statement that Salesforce will use AWS as its de facto data center technology where it can't provide its own capability. So I think for me that's very interesting, the fact that Salesforce has got enough humility to use another product. It certainly isn't a competitive product, but I think it's sort of showing us that AWS is the corporate or the Silicon Valley sort of de facto sort of go-to technology. Not to take anything away from Microsoft Azure, we find it fantastic, and this man here is developing that architecture into something that's wonderful. So what we've got here is Satya Nadella. As what we've got here is a story around I think it's all been interesting for us to hear of the mobile, the fact that Microsoft are kind of coming away from mobile. And you could look at this as being a downgrade, or you could look at them being the wily fox. I think you'll find a lot of the hedge funds will argue that the Microsoft stocks are certainly underpriced for what Microsoft's capability are at the moment. And it's the things like this in terms of Satya Nadella being a wily fox. He knows he's not going to compete with that market. He knows he's not making money out of that market. And what Microsoft have slowly started to do is they've started to cannibalize the phones that are already out, so both iPhone and the Android. They're building obviously apps. You get the Office suite of application, as we see here. You're even getting the Edge browser app available within iOS. So I think they've realized it's not a big revenue stream. They just need to have a mobile capability. And when you look into Azure, Intune, and just the capabilities of remote desktops, MFA, and all of this good stuff, Microsoft, I think, are one of the strongest remote computing powers on the planet. And they've just been smart and said, look, we're not making money out of our Windows Phone. Let's just cannibalize everyone else's products out there. So I think that's a very, very smart move from Microsoft. So this item here in Fortune, Cisco just bought a machine learning startup. So I think people a lot of people ask me about machine learning, and I won't go into conspiracy theories and Terminator 2 and how this affects the human race. But one thing is clear is that machine learning doesn't have to be really complex rocket science. So I think machine learning in security, I think is a very sort of a good example of that, whereby we see here Cisco have bought a machine learning startup. So how will securities company like Cisco or Darktrace, which is another brand, to follow? Although we imagine we get in the middle, so we get into the middle somehow if we become a default gateway, if we're either packet sniffing, there's tools like Wireshark to effectively listening in into the, for want of a better word, radio frequencies that go across networks. So all we're basically saying is that we will use machine learning to say, right, analyze this, yep, train on this. This is what is good today. If anyone all of a sudden if this system starts wanting to talk to that system, or this user wants to start accessing this data, or this external factory is trying to connect in from this IP address, either alert us or ban that from happening until we tick something. So there are lots of products out there like HDF and, like I say, Darktrace, and just which are now engineered, and there's tools within Azure that will basically say, here's the server, here's the apps that are running on this server. If you want anything else to happen, please, I'm going to alert you, or you need to sign off to that can happen. I think this is a good evolution, because it's showing machine learning doesn't have to be rocket science to effectively. All it's going to do is take in the data that transfers over that network, and if anything changes within a tolerance, it's going to alert you. So, and I think technology is very much going this way. It's quite a rudimentary way of solving lots of technology-based problems. Crypto locker from Sophos. All it does is just every single time you change a file, it will then it will take a copy of the file that you changed before you change it, and then look at the deltas between the two files. And if it sees that you've changed more than 3 or 4 files in a mass way, i.e. locking them from a crypto perspective, then it will then shut that process down. So, although security is smart and cyber security technology is smart, there's quite rudimentary ways of actually solving a lot of the challenges that's currently out there at the moment. And if you look at the big software security vendors, Symantec or Sophos or Checkpoint or Palo Alto, their shares are absolutely going through the roof at the moment, and are likely to continue to do so. So this item here from New Scientist. So the reason why I put this in is that there's a law, I think it's Moore's law, if I'm not mistaken, that I think was the guy that was very senior or started very early back in Intel, that basically said computing power will double every 2 years. We're now, I believe, I read an article earlier on in the year that we're at the end of that generation, that compute power is way more doubling. And I think it's the evolution of GPU, so the graphics processor units. You'll see that Nvidia share prices are going through the wall, because they're not just being used for computer games, which the GPUs were originally used for. They're being used to very quickly analyze machine learning data for things like autonomous cars and autonomous vehicles. We know that the processing power that are used to mine bitcoins is predominantly done using GPUs as well. So this is really, I don't pretend to understand quantum mechanics, but this is sort of saying about Google quantum computing plans threatened by IBM curveball. So the arms race for super compute power and capability is just getting started as far as I'm concerned, and I think there's exciting things more to come in this space. So the next one here, there was an article in the Guardian. So calling all millennials, your cybersecurity industry needs you. So yes, there are lots of jobs that are required within cybersecurity. The biggest problem, the amount of juniors that come into my business and say, I want to be a hacker, cybersecurity professional. It's all very cool. There's a bit of anti-establishment within cybersecurity as well. But what people don't understand, and please send anyone my way if they want to become a security professional, infrastructure guys will spend 5 to 10 years learning infrastructure. Network guys will learn 5 to 10 years doing their bit. Software coders will learn 10 years plus being a good software coder. The list goes on. The problem with cybersecurity is that you have to be an expert in all fields of technology. To me, it's up there with the medical professions and being right up there with the most smartest scientists on the planet. You have to know. It's not you don't have to go to Yale or Harvard or Cambridge or Oxford to be a cybersecurity professional. To be good good at this job, i.e. to not just be able to use a load of tools that's already available in the market. You have to be either super smart, or you have to put the time in, and this is hours, countless hours and countless hours. One of the exams to become a cybersecurity professional means you have to do a 24-hour hackathon and then have 24 hours to then write that up. It's serious profession, and everyone wants to do it, but when people realize how much time you have to dedicate, these guys that are good at cybersecurity really are at the top of their game. I had a couple of French guys in my office doing an audit just this week, and the level of training and expertise these guys have, you just couldn't begin to comprehend. So I just think the message out there is please don't take a cyber security profession lightly. It's a lifelong exercise as far as I'm concerned. So this one here, Gluon brings AI developers self-tuning machine learning. So interesting, this come out both Amazon and Azure at the same time. So what we have to understand for the human race is that deep learning being working with lots of messy data, whereas just normal machine learning is more sort of more organized data. It doesn't mean to say that organized data has to be in the way of a nice, neat sort of transactional database, but it certainly does help. But deep learning is allowing more messy data sets to be worked on, and I think the only way that I can explain how the evolution of AI, machine learning, and deep learning is evolving is that these tool sets are being built into technology, and quite often open source technology, that the masses can use. So I'll give you an example. When AI and machine learning and stuff first started coming out, it was more sort of data scientist type technology. Now your average developer can pick this up and start sort of training AI based on certain data sets. A good analogy may be when drones first, or toy helicopters first appeared, there was a nightmare to control. Now you can have a drone that fits in your pocket that will fly around your house and avoid walls and this, that and the other, and be able to adjust itself to wind and atmospheric pressures and all of this good stuff. So I think that's the analogy there. It used to be something for the smartest only of the human race. Now AI, MI, and machine learning and deep learning is now available to anyone that knows how to write a bit of code and to understand the core principles. So another thing that's come out sort of in the last week is this cracked Wi-Fi flaw. So yes, it is a flaw. Yes, that's why we should keep phones and Wi-Fi devices and things like that patched. We use a lot of Meraki, which is a Cisco product. We use a lot of Meraki stuff, and that was sort of patched almost instantly. I think if you was able to pick up, spend some time on YouTube and generally pick up some of the open source tools that's available for hacking Wi-Fi, you would actually be horrified in terms of how quickly you can hack Wi-Fi, depending on how they're secured. Quite often what we would do is just create a tool that will advertise as an SSID. I'm going to copy whatever my wireless Wi-Fi at home name is, and then when devices try to connect to that, it will then, even if it's a weak signal, it will know what username and password, and then bang, you're in. There's a device called a Pineapple device that does this, but there's lots of open source tools that you're able to use. So yes, it is a flaw, but if you knew the real harsh realities of cybersecurity and Wi-Fi protection, this potentially could be the least of your worries. But making sure that everything patched is definitely the place that we need to be. So this next story is about Microsoft keeps it zipped over 2013 cyber attacks. And what this basically is some of the flaws that's come out in Microsoft operating systems have been because Microsoft have an internal bug tracking database. All development teams have them. Someone was able to hack this database and then be able to listen in on where people are identifying the holes within Microsoft. So very scary, and something that you don't expect from Microsoft. But I think what's really important to understand, if this can happen to Microsoft, it can happen to you. So this is why, the discipline that's required around sort of cybersecurity, and we start getting into something what we call SecOps, in terms of building security into everything that we do. If it can happen to Microsoft, it can definitely happen to you. So this item here coming in, it's about the Windows 10 full creators update. So this is in Computer World. So I think what we have to understand is that Microsoft, it's an evolution, Windows 10. We said that it's only ever going to be Windows 10 and we update it. So this full creators updates, there's quite a few updates that's coming in on this. It's meant for the people that originally tested it. There's meant to be quite a lot of compliments around this. Obviously from my, there's some graphical graphical enhancements I'm not too sure how I feel about, but I'm quite old-fashioned in that sense. But in terms of, I think it's showing that Microsoft are starting to get rid of the Windows 10 gremlins now, and it is starting to become an operating system that people are using. We know that it was a ballsy move for them in terms of what they wanted to do to make it deviceless. They have been successful to a certain extent. Now there's a lot more hardware compatibility for it. I think it's starting to get a bit more exciting for Microsoft. So one point here on Computer World in the UK, what happens when cyber criminals start to use machine learning? So I think this is interesting, based on the fact that a lot of these phishing, all phishing bots are now, is that they are aimed at your email inbox or your online exchange environment. So they will then work out what is an email, what isn't an email, and then the machine learning bots and a bit of smart coding will write phishing exercises to then go out on the market, and they will even understand how quickly IP addresses get shut down and things like this. So a lot of these phishing emails that's coming over to you is the result of machine learning bots that's writing phishing and sending out phishing emails so that they can get your usernames and passwords. It used to be, can we get into people's banks and things like that? Not so much these days. We've had a client recently that didn't have MFA on their 365 environment, so the machine learning bots managed to put a phishing into that organization, gets in username and password, got into their email address, forward lots of email, and then they get a ransom to say, we've stolen your data. If you want it back, you are going to have to pay X amount of money. And quite often they're not asking for thousands and thousands, and people are doing it just as a cover-up aspect. So this is where machine learning is potentially starting to work against us slightly. So this next one in CIO, so Mercedes AMG, so this is really just an article generally about how the Mercedes teams use technology throughout a weekend of data analysis or out a race weekend. I found it very, very interesting because I've always thought these guys must be at the top of the game from a technology perspective, but this was just a lovely insight to understand a bit more about how Formula One technology works. So this item here, one on Linux desktop on your Android phone. So I think this is interesting because Microsoft made it quite easy for you to be able to use your phone as a desktop operating system. I think it was the Luminars and the Nokias who was able to do this as well. I think Apple make it extremely hard for you to do this because they obviously want you to be able to continue buying Apple kit. But it's interesting that we're starting to see more of a desktop approach to with the Android and the Samsungs. And I actually think, given the fact that people's compute usage, i.e. internet, and we've got lots of apps that are out there, and sort of email usage, the amount of compute power that's in a mobile phone should be pretty much good enough for the average person to be able to link up to a few monitors and a mouse and keyboard, and away they go. So it's interesting to see that this is starting now. It's something that I'm surprised has taken so long to actually happen. If Android successfully do this, which I'm sure they will do, you can argue, what does this do to the Chromebook business? But I'd be interested to see how the iPhone adapts to this as well. Next one, Raspberry Pi. So these tools are really good for education. I just want to put it out there that Raspberry Pi have got a laptop. A lot of these are being used in sort of emerging cultures and third world countries and stuff like that. The people that made Raspberry Pi did actually sell out for, I think it's 200 million plus to another company, but that said, they're still building technology that seems to be evolving the rest of the world, which is quite good. And very last, Office 365, it's obviously here to stay. There's an article here about what to expect from multi-geo Office for 365. This is basically saying if you want your 365 products to be within a certain region, you can nominate to keep them in the UK or a certain region in Ireland or the States or somewhere like that. This functionality, I didn't really understand this because it's already we already have clients that choose to keep their data in the UK. So if you check with Microsoft and you don't want your data leaving a certain data center, you can this functionality already exists. So do check with Microsoft or 365 or get in contact if that is something that you would be interested in. So I think that's it for this week. Hopefully we'll be put something up in the next week or so.